listening to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the #1 global business talk and news network on the internet, IBGR, International Business Growth Radio, the world of business at your fingertips. Today's episode, we've been talking about getting to the promised land. And a few moments ago, we were talking about one of the questions that a lot of folks ask as they're getting the exit itch, and that is, aren't I meant for so much more? Well, we're going to assume that you are. And I want to shift gears a little bit into this and talk about the 4 exits. And depending on how you want to sort the different exit paths that you can take from your business, we're going to put them into 4 different buckets. But this is more of an art than a science. We've seen this sorted into 6 different exits. We've seen this sorted into 7 different exits. We've seen it sorted into a couple different exits. For today's purposes, we're going to talk about what does it look like to position your company for a lucrative sale. We're going to talk about what does it look like to hand down your company as a legacy. We'll talk about creating a passive income stream with the business you already own, perhaps becoming a chairman or an investor or a parallel entrepreneur. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about one that's a lot more common than people want to know, but we'll talk about going bankrupt. And we will invite you to use a piece of your brain called the conscious part of your brain to consciously go bankrupt, or perhaps at least go through an orderly liquidation of your company. And so our first story is one about maximizing your business for the sale. And longtime listeners of the show, folks who have come to our Grow to Exit events, folks who have come to our Creating Your Perfect Exit events, you've heard the story of a gentleman who came to me in 2014, 2015, thereabouts, and said, Wally, if you can help me get the demand side of my business going, if you can help make my sales and marketing work like clockwork, and just be consistent, that'll free up enough time on my side to get my operation going, and that'll give me enough on my side to position my business for sale. Well, what we did was we took this gentleman through one of our cornerstone entry-level programs. It's called the 8-Figure Growth Blueprint. And in a little bit, we'll tell you a little bit more about what we do during that program. But what we did was essentially a gap analysis on his entire marketing stack, looking for opportunities. And from that place where we saw all of the different holes, we then built him a plan, a multi-year plan, which is called our Grow to Exit Accelerator, and we started to work against it. And as we systematically filled in all of the gaps and then improved upon the initial filling of those gaps in his marketing stack, what happened? Well, we solved his initial need, which was to get his sales and marketing and demand generation to be consistent. And I'm not talking knocking anything out of the park. I'm not talking anything, that you're going to hear on Funnel Hacking Live or any of these kind of garbage places. But, I'm talking about just real life stuff, best practices, and about 2.5 years in, things were clicking along pretty good. And so I want you to notice it didn't happen overnight, but it didn't happen over that long of a period of time either, right? Well, a tragedy happened along the way, and I've got to give it to this guy. He called me up and he said, my wife died. I said, oh. He said, it was my wife's and I's life dream to build this business and then retire together. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, what we need to do is we need to just hit time out. He's like, Wally, I need 90 days. I need to regroup, get my ducks in a row, and then we'll be back in touch. So I've really got to give this gentleman credit for seeing the whole process through, because he got back together with me 90 days later and we kept working the plan. the original plan that he'd come to me with. And he saw it the whole way through. And if you've been listening to these episodes, you'll notice that he got hit with some disruption and he got hit with some death. And you have an 80% chance of those types of things happening to you every 5 years. And so he stuck it through, and that's why he's not a statistic, not one of the bad statistics at least. It was about this time of year, a few years ago, called me up and he said, well, guess what? I've sold my business to new owners. Mission accomplished. And we shook hands and we made sure that the new owners had everything that they needed and they inherited all of these systems and our services were no longer needed. We parted ways as friends. We parted ways, mission accomplished. And this is awesome, right? This is exit number one. This is selling to an external buyer. The operations bench kept all of their jobs. The new buyers had a true value that was transferred to them. And that's the key of transferable value. Awesome, right? Let's talk about a different type of exit. Selling internally. Now, this could look like selling to, you hear the word succession planning a lot. But this could look like a management buyout. This could look like an ESOP, which is an employee stock option plan. This could look like an orderly transition and rolling buyout to the next generation. And all of these qualify as what we would call selling to internal buyers. And there's a lot of reasons you might want to do that. And one of the reasons is, actually probably one of the more common reasons, is cultural. And it reminds me, in a former life, I lived in Fort Collins, Colorado. Great place. And Fort Collins was known at one point for years and years and years as the best place in America to live. And I haven't lived there for a while. I would be shocked if it still wasn't really high up on those lists. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But one of them is just the business culture and just the people culture. It's a really good place to live. And there was a beer brewing company that, if you drink beer, you've probably heard of them. They're New Belgium Brewing Company, the folks who make Fat Tire and things of that nature. And New Belgium was started in the early 90s in Fort Collins. And I remember distinctly actually going on a tour of their brewery, I can't say that word, sometime around 2000, the year 2000. And I remember that I doubled the size of their brewery. And to give you a sense, they had done that because they had just opened the California market. And I'm not really telling you about that because it's like, oh, they're successful and all this cool stuff happened. No. I'm going to tell you about how you got from the second floor back down to the first floor if you wanted to. It's through a slide. As in, like, do you remember being in third grade and taking a metal slide? Yeah, they have one of those in the brewery. So the reason I tell you that story is because it's funny. But that tells you a lot about their culture. And so when it was time for the founding group to get out of the business and find their exit strategy, they chose an ESOP route. And you can look all of this up separately if you'd like. But what I think is cool about that is they said, you know what, our culture is so important to us that we want to take care of all these employees. So that's another route you can take. Third exit is what we call the scale out and go passive with your business. So think becoming a chairman or think becoming an investor. There was a gentleman who I knew who had just gotten out of a tough partnership, and he had a soil company, and he was making a specific type of soil for a specific type of crop. And I'm in Colorado, so you might be able to figure out what kind of crop I'm talking about. And he basically took everything that he learned in his toxic partnership and re-engineered everything so that it was 3 times more efficient and so that he was 100% in control. And what I thought was interesting about this gentleman's approach was this soil company was part of an ecosystem of different companies that he owned. He also owned a company that provided ancillary chemicals and other types of growing mechanisms for the growers market. And he also had some product companies. And so the soil company was just one of three of his legs of the stool of active companies that he was actively building, actively architecting, actively leading, actively owning, but not working within. Does that make sense? So he had actually exited from three companies to a great extent and was chairman of three companies that were all part of the same ecosystem but also separate. So he's what we call a parallel entrepreneur as opposed to a serial entrepreneur. A serial entrepreneur goes 1, 2, 3, right? Parallel entrepreneur builds one, keeps building one, and steps out. Builds two, keeps owning the dividends from two, steps out, builds three, and they might all eventually merge together, right? Because they're part of an ecosystem. So that's a different kind of exit. And each of these exits is going to bear much more discussion. And so we're just introducing the concept today. But that's scaling out and going passive. And then finally, there is the orderly liquidation, or what I call going consciously bankrupt. And unfortunately, this one is a lot more common than you probably want it to be. Because again, you go back to the fact that over the next 5 years, you are more than likely to experience death, disability, divorce, disruption, disagreement, all of these things within your business. That's why if you walk into a room of 40 people and they all want to exit their business, 2 years later, one of them will have exited and be happy. 8 of them will have exited, that is. One will be happy. So there's a lot that can go wrong here. And so what I would invite you to do is consider working with someone who has the CEPA designation, the Certified Exit Planning Advisor designation. Of course I do. Exitology is part of what we call the value acceleration model within the Exit Planning Institute's designation. And the bottom line there is that people with a CEPA designation can generally get you up to a 40% increase in the value of your business. So we'll be back in about 2 minutes. You're listening to Exitology, Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the International Business Growth Radio Network.